Okay, everybody, so this will be a sample 30S final project. Let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to start by making a brand new project. And yes, I'm going to call it final project. Okay, for CS30S. This is a CS30S level final project. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some classes to this project. And I'm going to do that very easily. We did this in one of the units by going to the 30S help page, because there's a bunch of helpful code on there that can help you with this problem solving. So I'm going to go to 30S help. I'm going to scroll down. So you might remember down here for some of the units, I have these GitHub repositories that you can find helpful code in. And I'm going to go to the one from the classes unit. So the last unit we studied. And I think we're going to need some of these. So the dialogues, the numbers, and the text Java files. So I'm going to open each of these. Open dialogues, open numbers, open text. Okay, so there they are. You might remember we also did this. I'm going to copy and paste this into my project. But first I've got to make these Java files. So I'm going to right click, new Java class, numbers. Right click, new Java class, dialogues. Right click, new Java class, text. If you already made these in a previous assignment, then you can actually literally drag and drop them from your other assignments into here. But I'm going to do this right from scratch. So, and when I copy and paste these, another way you can do this off GitHub is to click that little button that says raw, which just gives you just the code. It doesn't color code it, but you can literally select all this code for dialogues, select it all, and paste it in, okay? And then it color codes it once it gets it into NetBeans dialogues. You will have to change this package line because the package line from my GitHub page is not the same as the one in this new project, but you can literally use the light bulb to do this for you. And you can just say, change package declaration to, and it'll fix it. Okay, now I'm going to do the next one. So I'm going to go to numbers, go to the raw, select it all, go to GitHub, or sorry, go to NetBeans, select it all, paste it in, and change the package declaration. Now I'm going to do it with text. Click raw, select it all, copy it, paste it, and change the package. Okay, so that was a quick way to get numbers, dialogues, and text done. They're done and in your project. They are now available for you to use with what we will do moving forward. And what's wrong with numbers? What's wrong with you, numbers? Oh, I pasted this dialogues in twice. That's my fault. Let's try that again. Numbers, raw, select all, copy, select all, paste. Copy paste is a powerful tool, but if you screw it up, it can be annoying. There we go. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to need for this sample final project is I'm going to add on to this a user interface, something that the user can use, which isn't required for final projects, but it's actually pretty easy to do if you've been watching the last week, the recordings of me doing those graphics and extras. So I'm going to right click and make a new JFrame form. Right click, new JFrame form, which will launch the NetBeans designer, allowing me to build the design there. Now, what am I going to call this thing? Well, what I'm going to call it is what it's going to be. It's going to be a user interface, which I'm going to shorten to the acronym UI, for essentially logging in to a potential program. And the final project could be whatever, but any kind of program could have a login or users. So you can make things like a high score table or leaderboard or something like that. So I'm going to make a JFrame form. I'm going to call it login UI, login user interface. Okay? It's still a class, so I'm going to start it in a capital letter, but I'm using the JFrame form, which means that NetBeans will then launch the visual designer so I can build this thing. The build is going to be pretty simple. I'm going to put a couple labels on here. So I'm literally dragging and dropping label from over here under swing controls onto my design. I'm going to be putting a couple text fields. There's two different things here. There's the text field and the text area. The text area is a little more complicated. Text field, for those of you who did the grade 10 computer science courses in C#, they call that a text box. Okay? I'm going to put 3 buttons. Just be careful with the buttons that you just pick button, not toggle button. That's a little different. You'll also notice things like buttons down here. We're not going to use those yet, but we will in a second. I'm going to add one more label up top here. And then here's where things get a little more interesting. Out of this section here called AWT, I'm going to grab this thing called the list, which is what's called a list box. Now I also realize there's one up here under swing. There's a list box up there. But believe it or not, this one down here is easier to use. And that's the goal here with this sample final project, is to make it easier. So make sure I grab the one here, list, and add it in. Okay? So that's what I got. 3 labels, 2 text fields, 3 buttons, and a list. Okay? Now I can use this properties window to change some properties of this stuff. Okay? So for example, I'll just quickly whip this up. Registered users. Oops. Oh, registered users. This is going to be, this J label will be name. And this one will be password. Okay. These 2 text fields, I'm going to just clear out the text. They don't need any text. But you may want to re-stretch it out. Once you clear the text out, it tends to make it just shrink it down to nothing. Okay, so name and password. And then my buttons. One button's going to be create account. One button's going to be delete account. And one button's going to be login. Okay, so there's the 3 buttons. It's going to position this little list. Oops. As you see, sometimes with this NetBeans designer tries to help you by moving stuff around, and sometimes that can be not helpful, but there we go. That's going to be my design for this. Now, again, I'm trying to be quick with this. You could, if you had more time, really kind of make this look a lot prettier. You could add pictures and all the fancier stuff, but I'm trying to make this as quick as possible. So there it is, okay? Now, I'd like to be able to see this thing actually up and running. A quick way to do that is to click this little eyeball right here, which previews it for you. But I want to do it a little more accurate than that. So now I'm going to go back to the very first file that this project made, Final Project CS30S, which has a copy of public static void main. And I'm going to erase this comment and put in there login UI equals new login UI. And on the second time I write it, I'm going to use a lowercase l. Now, in doing the classes unit, you know this is the class, this is the object, this is the constructor method. Okay? But now it will go to the login UI, and now it will go to the source code. So again, we saw this last week, how I did this with the extras unit. So I'm going to go to the source code, which a lot of it is written for me by the designer, but there is a constructor method here for us to work with. We don't want to touch this line because that line that says init components is what builds the user interface. But what we can do is add code after that. So I'm just adding that in there as the comment. So this is going to be the code after the designer written call to the method that builds the design. So now I'm going to say this dot set visible true. So it will set the login screen to be visible. So I'm going to try and run this now. And there's my login screen, visible on the screen. So I got already that done in the span of about just under 10 minutes there. So I get name, password, I got buttons, they don't do anything, and there's going to be this list box over here. Okay, so that's a good start. It's a good start to this project already. We're checking off some mastery factors. Okay, now, adding to this project before we get any further, we're going to make users. So we can make use of a class that we already have from the course. From Computer Science 30S, we wrote a class called the person class back in the classes unit. Well, I'd actually like to reuse that class in this project. So I'm literally going to right click and copy it right out of my example from the course. Copy the person class. Then I'm going to go down to my final project, right click on this package, and paste it. Now you'll notice when I go to paste, this option here, Refactor Copy, comes up. That's the one you should choose, because what that does is it not only pastes it, but it modifies some of the code to make sure that it's now part of this new project. So that's what I'm going to do. Right click, paste, Refactor Copy. Refactor. So now the person class is part of this project, including all the comments and all the stuff we did back in that unit. I may not need all that code, but it's there for me. Now what I am going to do is build a new class that I'm going to use for a user of this program. Right? Yeah, so I'm going to make a class called user. So I'm going to right click, new Java class, capital U, user. So I'm making a user. And so there it is. A user will be part of this. So you can see here, I've already got multiple classes in action here. From the user I just created to the person class that I brought over from my example to text, numbers, and dialogues, which we got right off the help page, to the login UI, which was built with the designer, to this Java file, which just came with the project when we built it. We've literally written just 2 lines of code, 1 line of code so far. Okay, but here's what we're going to do with the user class. The user is a person. It extends the person class. So this is now the use of inheritance in this project, which is a mastery factor, which is good. So a user is a person. A user will have this property as part of the class, a password property. Every user will have a password. And it makes sense that we hide or encapsulate this property. And by property, I mean it's a variable. Specifically for this class, it's a global variable. So we are hiding the fact that that password is part of the person class. Now you think, well, I need a name too. I don't need a name because it inherited name from the person class. So that's already done. Okay? Let's write a constructor for this class. A constructor method is a method with the same name as the class, no return type, I'm preaching to the choir here. You should already know this. I'm also going to pass this constructor a name and a password, so that when you build a user, you build it with a name and a password. So this dot password equals password. Again, if you don't understand this code I'm writing, you can look back on the classes unit for a little bit of clue on that. But how do I access the name? It comes from the superclass. Luckily, the name property of the superclass is a public property, so this should work. So when I build a user, it comes with a name and a password. Okay? Yes, you should write in the code for this. I don't want to take the time on this video to write that in, but I'm reminding you guys that for your project, you should also be commenting all this stuff. Okay, now, that's pretty good so far. We've got all these classes in our final project so far, including a user interface. We're going to add one more class to this project. Because we're going to have multiple users, we're going to make a class that can store all these users. Now, we could put that inside of, for example, our user interface. We could make the users in there, and we will sort of do that. But what might be nicer is, eventually, if you use this, what we're building in this video, to go on to work with something else in your project, like something that you build further, you might want to access that list of users further in. So I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to make another Java class for this project, a new Java class. And I'm going to call it globals, because this will essentially be a way to think of it as global variables across all the classes that I could potentially add to this project. So I'm going to make a class called globals. Here it is. Okay. Now, what am I going to make in the globals class? I'm going to make a public. So this one is not locked inside the class. User array. So I'm going to create an array of users, and that's actually what I'm going to call it. I'm just going to call it users. Okay? So this again is the use of arrays, something else from this 30S course. Multiple users, and I'm going to set it to a size right now, equals new user array, and you know right here you have to give it the size. That's one limitation of arrays, is you have to set the size. Okay? So I'm going to set it big enough for potentially whatever I need. I'm just going to set it to 100. You could easily make it a lot larger, 1,000, even 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 users. But that's going to take up memory, right? All those users theoretically could take up memory. But I'm also going to add one more word into here. And this is actually a word beyond the 30S course. So this could be an extra mastery point. I'm going to add this word to the front of this line, static. Okay? So I'm adding a keyword in here, and I'm going to put a little comment about that. And then we'll be pretty much done this part of the video for today. Well, maybe another 5 minutes. This makes a global variable across all classes in this project. And the word static essentially means shared. So we're sharing all the users across all of this. So this will make a little more sense once we get to using this class as part of the project. Okay, so that should be all we need to build in terms of classes for this project. Okay, from now on, it'll be just adding code. We've done our design. We've added all the potential classes we need. Let me just double check. Yep. And now we're going to go in and write code for all this stuff. Okay. One last thing. When we go to Login UI, you'll notice there's a little green triangle right here, just like there was a little green triangle on this one. If you go to Login UI and you go to the code for Login UI, whenever you use the NetBeans Designer to build a user interface, it adds its own version of public static void main, which is fine. You can keep that if you want. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that version of public static void main because I have my own version of public static void main over in this class. And then now when you look at this here, you can see the little green triangle is gone now. The only class that starts when I hit play is this one now. Okay? So when I hit play, it launches this one. All right. It's 11:19. Let's go for another 5 minutes on this to get some of this going. Let's go to our user interface, login UI. Okay, go to the design, and let's code our first button, create account, by double clicking the button. Okay, I didn't even bother naming this button. You notice it's still just called JButton1. If you were in grade 10 computer science, I would take marks away, but not in this course. Okay, so what do I want to do? I want to create a new user. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, but I need the name and password. So string name equals, well, I'm going to get the name out of this text box right here, which happens to be named JTextField1. Now again, depending on how you built your design, it might be called JTextField2, so you got to be careful with that. JTextField1 dot get text. This is built-in code to that stuff. We don't have to write this code, but it gives you the text contained within it, which is exactly what I need. Okay. Now I'm going to do a little error checking. If name equals null, that means they didn't put anything in there. Or name dot equals nothing. These again are built-in pieces of code you can use when working with strings. I'm going to display a dialog box to my user. By using the dialogues class that we imported, useful methods for working with dialogues, that has been a helpful piece in this course. Dot. And I can call upon the various methods that I have here in this class. So for example, maybe I want to just output some text. Now, if I wanted to, I could get a little fancier. I could use images and stuff like that. But I want to keep this simple. So I'm just going to output, please enter a name. Okay? So the dialogues will do that. And then I don't want the code to go any further. But I'm inside of a method right now, believe it or not. This is still a method that the designer wrote for me. So I can leave this method by just saying return. I can just exit the method right here. In other words, the code goes no further. Rather than write a big else statement and all the rest, and I can actually test that right now. If I try and click this button, please enter a name comes up, but if I had a name in there, it wouldn't have come up. So that works. Okay? And exactly what I just did with the name, I can do the exact same thing with the password. So string password equals jfield2.text. If password equals null, if the password equals blank, please enter a password. So now again, just to really quickly test that, if I have a name in here but no password, it says please enter a password. If I have a password but no name, it says please enter a name. And if I have both, nothing happens because we're good. If I get to here, if I pass the error checks. So that's good. I passed the error checks. So now I'm going to make a user. User equals a new user. And the user constructor takes the name and the password. So I build a user object. Almost done. I'm going to be almost done here in a second. Then I'm going to add this to the array. Okay? So one other quick thing about the array though. I need to know when I'm in the array, which spot do I place it at? So I'm going to go back to globals and I'm going to add a track which spot in the array to add to. So public static int index equals 0. We'll start it at 0, the first spot in the array. Back to login UI, globals dot users spot globals dot index equals this user. Okay, so I'm using the shared stuff, and then I need to move to the next user, to the next index for next time. So globals dot index plus plus. I add it so that the next time I add a user, it goes to the next spot. Okay? Pulling back a little bit, this is now the code I've added to JButton1 to add a user. Okay? I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to also want to add that user to this list box. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to do that. Okay? But in order to do that, I'm going to go now to the user class. And I'm going to add a method that gives me the information. A public string information method, or I'm just going to call it info. What do I want to display in the list box? Do I want to display the username and the password? I don't think so. I just want the username. So I'm going to return super.name here. Okay, so the name of the user is going to get returned to me there. And I can change that if I want. But anyways, the way I'm going to do that now is add to the list box list1 dot add, this is how easy it is, user dot info. So I'm adding it to there. What's wrong here? Index globals. Oh, said hit save. Okay, let's just do one quick test and then we'll call it a day. Wox is the username, password is cheese, and create account, and there is Wox has been added. And if I did it a second time, Dave Potato, Dave is now added into the list box. So we're well underway here getting started. Okay, that's where I'm going to stop the video for today.